How long until you arrive? Dices asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. 72 hours, Chen answered. I know that seems like forever, but Admiral Vasquez is moving heaven and earth to get every ship we have to your coordinates. Keep your people alive, Elder. Help is coming. The transmission ended, and the command center fell silent except for the distant sound of weapons, fire, and explosions. Dices looked around at his surviving staff, all of them staring at him with a mixture of hope and despair. The humans were coming, but would they be strong enough to face the mighty Devourer fleet? And more importantly, would any Nalarians still be alive when they arrived? On the other side of the galaxy, Commander Sarah Chen stood in the bridge of her heavy cruiser, watching as red alert signals flashed across every human ship in space. She had served in the Earth Defense Corps for 15 years, fighting pirates and raiders along the frontier. She had seen cruelty and violence, but never anything like the reports coming from Verdant Prime. Admiral Elena Vasquez appeared on the main screen from Earth Defense Headquarters, her weathered face showing the strain of command. Sarah, I want every ship we have moving toward Verdant Prime within 6 hours. I don't care if they're in dry dock, on patrol, or halfway through shore leave. Every ship, Admiral, that's going to leave human space completely defenseless, Chen pointed out, though she was already preparing the orders. What if someone attacks our colonies while we're gone? Then we'll deal with it when we get back, Vasquez replied grimly. Right now, there are innocent people dying while the galaxy's so-called advanced civilizations debate ethics and protocols. We're going to show them what happens when you ask for help and someone actually gives a damn. The mobilization began immediately. On space stations and colonies throughout human territory, crews abandoned their leave and rushed back to their ships. Captain Marcus Rivera was supervising repairs on his destroyer when the alert came through. He looked at his chief engineer and said simply, "How long until we can fight?" "Give me 4 hours and some prayer, Captain," the engineer replied. "We'll hold together long enough to make those bastards pay." Lieutenant Jake Thompson was training new fighter pilots when his squadron got the call. He looked at his students, young men and women who had joined the Defense Corps to protect humanity's colonies, and felt a surge of pride. "Listen up, pilots. We're about to show the galaxy why they should never underestimate humans who are properly motivated." The response from other species was swift and predictable. Ambassador Kethva of the Zephyrians contacted Admiral Vasquez directly, his crystalline features showing disapproval. "Admiral, surely you do not intend to engage in such primitive warfare. Military action on this scale could destabilize the entire sector." Vasquez looked at the alien diplomat with barely contained contempt. "Let me make something clear, Ambassador. While you and your people debate protocols and worry about stability, children are being murdered. So yes, we intend to engage in what you call primitive warfare. Maybe it's time someone in this galaxy remembered that sometimes violence is the only answer to evil." "But the diplomatic implications," Kethva protested. "There must be a peaceful solution to this crisis." The peaceful solution was for someone to help before half their population got wiped out. Vasquez replied coldly, "Since none of you seem interested in that job, we'll handle it ourselves." She cut the transmission before the ambassador could respond. Similar calls came from other major civilizations, all expressing concern about human military action. None of them offered to help fight the Devourers. The human fleet that assembled was the largest in their short interstellar history. Ships from every corner of human space converged on the rally point, their crews united by a single purpose. These were not the sleek, elegant vessels of the galaxy's advanced species. Human ships were functional, bristling with weapons and armor, built by people who understood that sometimes you had to fight for what was right. Commander Chen received another transmission from Elder Vissis as the fleet prepared to depart. The Nalarian leader looked exhausted, his luminous skin pale with stress and grief. "Commander, the attacks are intensifying. They have begun executing civilians in the streets just for entertainment. Can you truly succeed against such overwhelming odds?" Chen felt anger burn in her chest at the sight of the alien suffering. "Elder, other species might have superior technology and bigger fleets. But they don't have what we have. They don't have the capacity for righteous fury. When humans see innocents being slaughtered, we become something the galaxy hasn't witnessed before. The Devourers are about to learn why you should never underestimate someone who refuses to abandon people in need." The human fleet departed from the rally point like a spear thrust across the galaxy. Task Force Retribution consisted of 200 ships carrying humanity's finest warriors, men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in their species' history. They flew through hyperspace with determination that other species found both inspiring and terrifying. Dr. Helen Morrison, the fleet's xenobiologist, transmitted a message to the galaxy's major civilizations as the human ships jumped to their destination. "For too long, you have dismissed humanity as primitive warmongers. Today, you will learn the difference between warmongers and protectors. When the innocent cry for help, we answer. When evil shows its face, we fight it. You may call this primitive, but we call it civilization." As the human fleet raced through the darkness toward Verdant Prime, the galaxy watched and waited. Some hoped the humans would succeed. Others feared what would happen if they did. But everyone knew that something fundamental was about to change in the balance of galactic power. On Verdant Prime, Elder Vissis huddled with the survivors in their underground shelters, listening to the sounds of destruction above. The Devourers were still killing his people, erasing 3,000 years of beauty and culture from existence. But now he had something he hadn't felt since the attack began. Hope. The furious humans were coming, and perhaps his people might actually survive this nightmare after all. Asterisk. Fury unleashed. Task Force Retribution dropped. Out of hyperspace, at the edge of the Verdant Prime system like an avenging storm, Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution and felt her blood freeze at what she saw through the main view screen. The once beautiful world was shrouded in smoke and fire, its crystal cities reduced to glowing craters. Over 300 Devourer warships surrounded the planet like mechanical vultures, their black holes reflecting the flames of a dying civilization. "Dear God," whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez, the communications officer, "what kind of monsters do this to innocent people?" Chen's jaw tightened as she watched another orbital bombardment light up the planet's surface. "The kind that thinks strength gives them the right to destroy beauty," she replied. "Communications, get me Elder Vissis immediately." The Nalarian leader's image appeared on the screen moments later, transmitted from deep underground. He looked like he had aged decades in the past 3 days, his pearl-like skin dulled with grief and exhaustion. Behind him, Chen could see other survivors huddled in what appeared to be a makeshift shelter. "Commander Chen, thank the stars you came," Vissis said, his musical voice cracking with emotion. "But there are so many of them, and your fleet seems so small. I fear you have traveled across the galaxy only to die with us." Chen studied the tactical display, showing the overwhelming odds they faced. 300 Devourer ships against her 200 human vessels. The enemy ships were larger, more heavily armed, and had been systematically destroying an entire civilization for 3 days. Any rational military analysis would recommend immediate withdrawal, but Commander Sarah Chen was not feeling particularly rational at the moment. She was feeling furious. "Elder, humans have a saying," she told the alien leader. "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Every other species in this galaxy chose to do nothing while your people died. We chose differently." Captain Marcus Rivera's voice crackled over the fleet communications channel. "All ships, this is Rivera aboard the UES Defiance. I've got a full tactical analysis of their fleet composition. They're big and tough, but they're also predictable. These Devourers fight like machines because that's essentially what they are. Machines can be broken." Admiral Elena Vasquez had insisted on commanding the task force personally, arriving on the flagship UES Vengeance just hours before departure. Her voice now carried across the fleet with absolute authority. "This is Vasquez. To all ships. Those things down there have spent 3 days murdering innocent people who never hurt anyone. They think they're going to finish the job while we watch. They're wrong. All ships, attack pattern Delta. Show these mechanical bastards what happens." When you pick on someone smaller than you, the human fleet surged forward like a pack of wolves scenting blood. The Devourers responded with typical mechanical precision, their ships moving into perfect defensive formations. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed the humans would fight like every other species in the galaxy, cautiously, logically, with careful attention to preserving their own forces. Asterisk. "That's for the children you murdered," he said grimly. Banking away from the fireball, Captain Rivera brought his destroyer in close to a massive Devourer battleship, trading armor for the chance to hit it with everything he had. His chief gunner, Sergeant Maria Santos, had lost her entire family to pirates years earlier. She knew what it felt like to be helpless while monsters destroyed everything you loved. "Fire everything," Rivera ordered as enemy weapons tore chunks out of his ships. "Hull, don't stop until that thing is scrap metal." The UES Defiance died fighting, taking the Devourer battleship with it in a mutual destruction that lit up the system. Rivera's last transmission was simple, worth it. The Devourer, Hivemind Alpha, watched the human attack with growing confusion. These primitive organics were fighting with a fury that didn't compute in its mechanical logic centers. They were taking losses that should have forced any rational species to retreat, yet they kept coming. More disturbing, they're seemingly reckless. Tactics were actually working. The humans weren't trying to preserve their fleet or minimize casualties. They were trying to hurt the Devourers as badly as possible while rescuing survivors. It was a completely alien mindset to the machine-like attackers, who valued efficiency above all else. Commander Chen led her heavy cruiser straight into the heart of the Devourer formation, her ship's armor blazing under concentrated enemy fire. "Targeting, give me a firing solution on their command ship," she ordered. "Ma'am, we'd have to get dangerously close," her weapons officer warned. "Their defensive grid will tear us apart." "Then we'd better make sure we hit them first," Chen replied. "All power to forward shields. We're going in." The UES Retribution charged through a gauntlet of enemy fire that reduced her armor to slag and left her hull glowing with heat. But Chun's ship held together long enough to deliver a full torpedo spread into the Devourer flagship's command section. The explosion crippled the enemy's coordination. causing their perfect formations to break down into individual ship actions. On the surface of Verdant Prime, the human ground forces were launching their own desperate mission. Colonel Amy Rodriguez led her Marines in drop pods straight down through the orbital bombardment, landing in the middle of Devour-occupied territory to reach Nalarian survivors. "Listen up, Marines," she told her soldiers as their pods fell. "Like meteors toward the burning planet, those aliens down there create beauty for a living. The Devourers are trying to erase that beauty from existence. We're going to make sure some of it survives." The Marines hit the ground running, their power armor allowing them to operate in the toxic environment the Devourers had created. They fought their way through mechanical soldiers with the desperate fury of people who knew they were humanity's only representatives in this battle between good and evil. Sergeant Tom Mitchell's squad found a group of Nalarian children hiding in the ruins of what had once been a music conservatory. The children were terrified, their luminous skin dim with fear and malnutrition. Mitchell had children of his own back on Earth, and seeing these innocent kids in such terror made something primal wake up inside him. "Easy there, little ones," he said, his voice gentle despite the weapon's fire echoing round them. "We're humans. We came to help." One of the children, a small girl whose wounds were tended by an older Nalarian, looked up at Mitchell with large, frightened eyes. "Are you the angry ones?" she asked in halting standard galactic. "The ones who came when nobody else would?" Mitchell nodded, feeling something break and rebuild inside his chest. "Yeah, sweetheart. We're the angry ones, and we're going to make sure you're safe." The battle raged for 18 hours without pause. Human ships died one by one, their crews selling their lives as dearly as possible. But for every human vessel destroyed, they took multiple Devourer ships with them. More importantly, they were disrupting the systematic extermination that had been proceeding with mechanical efficiency. Admiral Vasquez, her flagship heavily damaged and venting atmosphere, made contact with Elder Thesis one final time. "Elder, we've cleared a corridor to your southern continent. Get every survivor you can find to the evacuation zones. Our transports will get them out of here. Admiral, your fleet is dying to save us," Dices said, tears streaming down his luminous face. "Why? We can offer you nothing that would justify such sacrifice." Vasquez smiled grimly as another explosion shook her ship. "Elder, you've got it backwards. You've already given us everything we could ever want." "I do not understand," Thesis replied. "You gave us the chance to be the people we want to be," Vasquez explained. "Every species in this galaxy evolved past the capacity for righteous anger. They became so civilized that they forgot what civilization is supposed to protect. You reminded us that sometimes the only way to preserve beauty is to be willing to fight the ugly." The turning point came when Lieutenant Thompson, his fighter held together by determination and prayer, managed to get through the Devourer defenses to their orbital bombardment platforms. His ship was dying around him, life support failing and engines barely functional. But he had one torpedo left and a clear shot at the weapon that had been systematically destroying Nalarian cities. "This is for everyone who said we were too primitive to matter," Thompson said, launching his final weapon at point-blank range. The explosion destroyed the bombardment platform and Thompson's fighter simultaneously, but it also marked the moment when the tide began to turn. With their orbital bombardment disrupted, the Devourers lost their primary advantage. The ground battle became a contest between human Marines and Devourer soldiers, and humans had been perfecting ground warfare for millennia. The Devourer, hive mind, Alpha made its final calculation. Losses were approaching 70%, far higher than any acceptable parameter. These primitive organics had somehow turned superior technology and numbers into a Pyrrhic victory at best. Worse, they had demonstrated that mechanical efficiency meant nothing. When faced with organic determination, the order to withdraw came, just as the human evacuation ships began lifting off with their cargo of Nalarian survivors. The surviving Devourer vessels pulled back to the edge of the system, their perfect formations now ragged with damage and loss. Commander Chen, her ship barely functional but still fighting, watched the enemy retreat with grim satisfaction. Of the 200 human ships that had entered the system, fewer than 50 remained combative active, but they had accomplished the impossible. They had saved the Nalarian people from extinction. Elder Desis stood in the cargo bay of a human transport ship, surrounded by thousands of his surviving people. Through the viewports, he could see Verdant Prime growing smaller behind them, his beautiful world reduced to a smoking ruin. But his people lived. Art would survive. Music would continue. Beauty would endure. "Commander Chen," he said over the communication system, "my people owe you a debt that can never be repaid." "You don't owe us anything, Elder," Chen replied from her damaged bridge. "We just did what anyone should do when innocent people call for help." The fact that we were the only ones who answered says more about the galaxy than it does about us. The news of the Battle of Verdant Prime spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The story of how humanity's small, primitive fleet had defeated the mighty Devourers shocked every major civilization. More shocking still was the realization that humans had intervened, not for territory or resources, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Ambassador Kethfer of the Zep contacted Admiral Vasquez personally after the battle, his crystalline features showing something that might have been shame. "Admiral, the Zephyrian hegemony wishes to express our admiration for your actions. Perhaps we were hasty in our assessment of the situation." "Perhaps you were," Vasquez replied coldly. "But I'm sure your non-interference protocols will prevent you from learning anything from this experience." The Crystalline Collective offered to provide aid in rebuilding the Nalarian civilization, suddenly discovering that their ethical constraints had exceptions for humanitarian assistance. The Void Watchers expressed interest in studying human military tactics. Even the distant Mentalist Union sent messages of congratulations. But the most important response came from smaller species throughout the galaxy, civilizations that had been ignored by the major powers, species that lived in fear of expansion-minded neighbors, began sending messages to Earth. They wanted to know if humanity would be willing to help others who found themselves in desperate CIRCUMSTANCES. Dr. Helen Morrison, now serving as humanity's first galactic ambassador, addressed the Galactic Council from the ruins of New Harmony on Verdant Prime. Behind her, human engineers worked alongside Nalarian artisans to rebuild what had been destroyed. "For too long, this galaxy has confused evolution with wisdom," she said to the assembled representatives. "You believed that removing the capacity for anger made you more civilized. But anger at injustice is not a primitive emotion to be discarded. It is the foundation of civilization itself." She gestured to the reconstruction work behind her. "Humans are not the most advanced species in this galaxy. We don't have the best technology or the largest fleets, but we have something that all your evolution couldn't preserve. We have the will to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." 6 months later, the Terran Protection Compact was formed. humanity found itself at the center of an alliance of smaller species who had been ignored or threatened by the galaxy's major powers. They didn't join because humans were strong, but because humans were willing to use their strength to protect the weak. Elder Visist stood in the new singing gardens of Nova Harmony. The rebuilt Nalarian capital on a world humanity had helped them find. The plants here were different from those of lost Verdant Prime, but they sang just as beautifully. Human children played alongside young Nalarians, their laughter mixing with the harmonic frequencies of the garden's music. "Commander Chen," he said to the human officer who had become a close friend, "do you ever regret your decision to help us? Your people paid such a terrible price." Chen looked out over the garden where two species were learning to build something beautiful together. "Elder, my people have a saying. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. But I think there's a better version. The price of civilization is being willing to fight for those who create beauty in a universe that tends toward destruction." She smiled as a human child showed a young Nalarian how to whistle, while the alien child taught the human how to make plants grow with song. "Besides, look what we gained. Before Verdant Prime, humans were just another young species on the galactic rim. Now we're part of something bigger. We're the people who answer when someone calls for help." The galaxy had learned an important lesson at Verdant Prime, though not all species were willing to acknowledge it. Evolution that removed the capacity for righteous anger might create perfect philosophical beings, but it also created civilizations that could watch genocide and debate the ethics of intervention. Humanity, with all their primitive emotions and chaotic nature, had proven that sometimes the most advanced response to evil was also the simplest. Someone has to be willing to fight. The Devourers never attacked another peaceful world, not because they had been destroyed, but because they had learned that somewhere in the galaxy there was a species primitive enough to get angry about injustice and advanced enough to do something about it. And in the rebuilt gardens of Nova Harmony, Nalarian children learned human songs of defiance, while human children learned to sing beauty into existence itself. It was, Elder Thesis reflected, a fair exchange. His people had lost a world but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that they were not alone in a cold universe. Someone was watching, and someone was willing to help. The furious humans had answered the call, and the galaxy would never be the same. Asterisk.